Welcome to the Dean's Roundtable podcast series with Bridget Johnson. Each month, we bring you game-changing conversations about K-12 education and leadership. Join us as top educators, field experts, and administrators share actionable strategies to transform your school community. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Dean's Roundtable podcast. I'm Bridget Johnson, founder of the Dean's Roundtable, where we bring together student-life professionals to connect, learn, and support each other in making a meaningful impact on student communities. Today's topic is one I've been exploring in more depth recently: neurodiversity and learning differences. Joining me today is a leader whose work is reshaping education, Haley Spira-Bauer, Chief Operating Officer and Chief Academic Officer at Full Mind. Full Mind addresses teacher shortages by live streaming certified educators directly to students, ensuring that every child has access to quality learning. Haley also hosts Learning Can't Wait, a podcast that tackles pressing educational issues and highlights innovative solutions. Welcome, Haley. I'm so glad to have you here today as we discuss how we can better support and empower students with diverse learning needs.
Bridget, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, Haley, tell me a little bit about yourself and Full Mind and your journey, how we got started.
I sure can. It's really interesting to be on the other side of the microphone. Whenever I find myself here, I have to remember that I am answering, not asking questions. So thank you for the opportunity. So my career began right after college. I did Teach for America, and I taught first, then second grade in the South Bronx at PS 55 under the leadership of Luis Torres, an incredible school leader who is still leading that school today. I continued my career onward at Harlem Village Academies in Harlem, New York. And there I had the opportunity to teach middle school, eventually go back into the elementary school and help open up the elementary schools for that network. And then I became a dean, which is a fun little interloping fact on my more academic journey, because after that 1 year as dean, which was very challenging, I learned a lot. I moved back into the academic director type of role, like an assistant principal, more focused on curriculum design, instructional quality, et cetera, which I did at elementary and then the middle school level for HVA. But I had a kid and moved out of New York City and came to what is now called Full Mind, which was then called iTutor.com. And I've been there 7.5 years, really focusing on working with our schools for high quality implementation, instructional impact, ensuring every single touch we have with schools and students is a profound touch that moves everybody in the community forward while making teachers and administrators' lives easier. So I feel really fortunate that my path has led me to where I am today, working in this virtual space with no geographic bounds to impact students' lives.
That is awesome. So we've had a couple of different conversations, and one that really struck me, and the reason why we're here today is talking about neurodiversity. And so I mentioned to you that I was getting my master's in restorative practices, and my course this term is about supporting high-risk, high-need students. And so my background in supporting high-risk, high-need students had always been on the socioeconomic side. And that's how I thought about high-risk, high-need students. And this course has totally kind of blown that up for me. I had never really thought about neurodiversity in that term and what that meant. Of course, I've known about, people learning different and having learning differences, but this really kind of shined a light for me in a way that I really just wanted to highlight that for other folks. So in your opinion, what's the definition, or what's your take on the term neurodiversity?
It's a great question. I think my answer today is different than my answer would have been about 10 years ago. Partly because just about 1.5 years ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I don't have typically presenting symptoms, mostly because the assessments for ADHD were built for boys and men, not for women and girls. And my experience growing up is not mirrored by what I saw in classrooms. So when I think about neurodiversity, I think about all the different types of disorders that have students and adults' brains wired differently, receiving information and inputs differently as people are experiencing the world, and then processing that information in a fashion that is not typical. And thus regurgitating into the world and experiencing the world very, very parallel and even sometimes intersecting with neurotypical peers. When I think about it from my school-based experience and my experience today working with hundreds of schools, we're often thinking about outliers, folks that are maybe behaviorally challenged. Their disability, as neurodiversity is manifesting as behavioral problems. And so we think about kids that can't sit still. We think about adults that have impulsive behaviors, maybe impulsive spending habits, or that multitask ineffectively and have messy homes. I think about how the media portrays neurodiversity, students with autism, or excuse me, students on the autism spectrum who maybe are nonverbal or are exceptionally gifted and are verbal but struggle to interact with peers. And I think some of those are right, but they are not a full picture of the full spectrum of neurodiversity as it exists.
Absolutely. And so, one of the things that has really struck me in my journey learning more about this is, how we treat those students and adults, to be very honest. And, I feel like there are two categories, and please correct me if I am, incorrect in this or kind of misinterpreting, but there are the high functioning people on the scale, and then there are people who we are putting in a separate category that aren't kind of what normal society or considered kind of a part of normal society. And so they are in a lot of ways ostracized, whether that's putting them in separate classrooms as students or just kind of casting them out as people who aren't kind of in normal society and with the norm. And so that really, for me, in thinking about how we support students, both students and adults in this world, and thinking about kind of the work that I do with leaders in general, I found myself asking the question, what have I done kind of in my previous life that has shown biased or not really taken into consideration people who are just a little bit different. And so I haven't asked you a question yet. I'm getting there, I think. But what I want to just kind of talk through with you is really just like, I guess my question for you is, how do we, as a normal society, support those who are a little bit different? Because I feel like in my experience, we have catered to, or we look at people's deficits versus their strengths. And I really want to talk about that.
Yeah, I appreciate where you're going with this. Two things I'll say. One, a saying in my home is when we know better, we do better. And the problem with education is that the problem and the blessing is that we should and can always be learning. So I look back in many instances in my own classrooms that I led and the schools that I supported, and I know information today that I did not know then. But now that I know them, I will do better. And I'm going to actually give you a little gentle pushback here
Okay.
that I don't think there is normal. Bridget.
Okay.
I don't think there is any normal in society. I think that as we learn more about the spectrum of human existence, whether it be gender, race, ethnicity, disability, or ability, I don't think there is normal. I think we're all outside the box in a way because no two people are alike. And so I would challenge us to think about subpopulations of children with disability in the exact way you kind of ended here, which is that are we approaching disability with a deficit lens versus an asset lens? You think about some of the portrayals we see for neurodiverse individuals in media, and we do see the twice exceptional kid. So the kid who has ADHD and autism, or autism, excuse me, and is gifted and talented, right? Performing very high on a intellectual assessment. And those students have gifts and talents that their neurodiversity actually fosters. Hyperfixation can be a problem if you can't focus on anything else, but can also be a gift. Some of the greatest scientists in our society are and thinkers are known neurodiverse and gifted and talented. And our greatest discoveries are because of that one facet of neurodiversity, that hyperfixation. And if you're a classroom teacher, it can be disruptive. So to your point about ostracizing those with that are on the spectrum or those that are neurodiverse, it's difficult when you have a class of 25, 30 kids that you need to move forward in the day and a student can't. The transition is difficult. I think about myself. And I think the reason why I didn't know that I was neurodiverse my whole life is because I couldn't retain information, but nobody knew that because I just studied 10 times as much. I remember carrying textbooks to high school parties, which made me very cool. And I remember sitting in the Van Pelt Library on Penn's campus, triple as long as my friends. And I just thought that that's just how I studied. Not everybody studied, though. That's how I studied. And today, I didn't realize it until I did, that my extreme chattiness and my ability to kind of take on a topic I'm passionate about, which I might be hyperfixated on, like educational equity, and make it my whole personality and my profession and my podcast topic. And I can go to a conference and talk for 6 days with folks about this and why their work connects to that, or challenge them on big topics. When in reality, that is considered part of my quote unquote disability. But if we approach it with an asset-based lens, it's actually served me to, grow my career and expand my impact in education to really support the topics I'm passionate about. So I think you're absolutely right that there is a deficit mindset. But the last point I'll make here is never to put down the most important profession, which is that of being an educator. I do believe that not all, but many of our educator preparatory programs, our teacher prep programs, are insufficiently preparing teachers for the challenges before them, especially when we talk about trauma, but also when we talk about neurodiversity. I had no idea how to support and meet my neurodiverse students where they were in their learning journeys when I began in the classroom. And yes, it's on me as someone who's pursuing this profession to learn that, but it's also on the teacher preparatory programs to provide the philosophical and practical skills and knowledge that our teachers need to be maximally effective.
Absolutely. And the ongoing support as you move through your journey, not just that initial training, which I think is super important, but also as you move through, because students change, you change. And so we need to make sure that we're continually supporting teachers in that way. So I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit. I do want to come back to how you discovered your neurodiversity. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about your time as a dean, because you did mention that. And as a former dean, I want to kind of touch on that a little bit. And so you said that experience was a little bit difficult for you. Can you talk about in what ways, and, kind of looking back on that experience, are there things that you would do differently?
Yes. So I took on the dean role when the dean that was in the position pursued a different opportunity in the middle of the year. So I didn't have any training for that work. And I was definitely not the best person to do that work, but I believe deeply in the power of relationships with students. And so I think I was a natural fit for that role because I invest in relationships very heavily as an educator. And that is important work for deanships.
Absolutely.
But I really did not know a ton about supporting teachers, students, families, community in that role until I met the Child Mind Institute. They're an outfit out of New York City who does work with private clients and schools. They offer grants to schools, and HVA got a grant, and it was the most transformative professional development I ever had. I'll never forget when I was working with a student who did not have a diagnosis at the time. So I will not give one myself. I am not a medical professional, and I am certainly not an expert. And he was not in class, needed to be in class, and I was with him. And the Child Mind Institute professional, Dr. David Anderson, hi Dave, if you're listening, was in the room with me, and I complimented the child who had struggled in math for solving a math question on the whiteboard correctly. I was like, wow, I'll change his name. His name is Anthony. Wow, Anthony, you solved that addition question correctly. I love how you used your method, like whatever method to solve it. There's the teacher. I was so excited. And Dave looked at me and goes, okay, I love how you're using positivity here because we want to be reinforcing positive things, but actually what he's doing is not something you want to reinforce. He picked up a marker he wasn't supposed to. He's not in the classroom. He's not following the one direction you gave him 2 minutes ago. And it was like a light bulb went off for me that yes, we want to use praise, which is a large part of shaping student behavior when you're trying to correct for some of the non-compliant behaviors that you are trying to erase or eliminate. But yeah, it had to be positive. And so that type of work with CMI, Child Mind Institute, the shadowing, the explicit professional development, the coaching, the modeling really brought me forward in supporting many neurodiverse learners, but a lot of students that were impacted by trauma and had manifestations of that trauma in the school setting that I was in. And I will never forget it. I recommend them all the time to friends that live in New York City and around New York City. I myself watch their webinars for what I suspect is my own neurodiverse child and how I can support him. He has not yet been tested, but I am pursuing that. And also just generally to be a better community member. How do you support students with selective mutism? That's one of their expertise. I go on field trips all the time, and I know there are kids that are not comfortable talking in every setting. So how do I make sure I'm the best possible community member for those children?
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And so going back to your diagnosis, let's talk about that a little bit. How did you discover what happened? Walk us through that.
So I will start by saying that neurodiversity has some genetic component that doctors have not yet figured out. And my mother and my brother are diagnosed as neurodiverse. And so my brother was really just the opposite of me. Like, didn't need to study, performed really well on everything, but was really a quiet neurodiverse. What they used to call inattentive subtype, or maybe they still call it that. Forgive me for not knowing the DSM exactly. But he got distracted really easily. And he didn't get diagnosed until college. Whereas my mom didn't get diagnosed until she was an adult. And I don't even know how to describe my mom. My mom's probably really chatty. She's super social. She was a flight attendant, was a great job, really fostered her neurodiversity in her career because she was doing something different every day. She was talking to people. But I didn't know, again, like I have this one story other than bringing textbooks to college that you were like, Haley, you have to tell this story when I told you it. But I also have a bunch of autoimmune diseases and have been chronically ill since I was 10. And I was being treated for lupus since I was 10 and arthritis and Sjogren's. And I was seeing my rheumatologist at age 20. And to paint a little picture, I had stage 3 renal failure and was being treated for stage 3 renal failure. So I won't mention my doctor's name. I love him. He actually just passed, but he took really good care of me and helped me live because that is a terminal diagnosis and I survived it. So he had a lot on his mind when he was treating me. And I approached him when I was 20 years old and I said, doctor, I think my brain's involved. Is it possible my brain's involved? Because for those who don't know about lupus attacks your body as though you're sick and it attacks organs. And I had just, survived fatal kidney disease and I thought my brain was impacted. And he looked at me and he said, Haley, what's your GPA at Penn? And I told him it was lovely. It was a great GPA, super proud of that number. And he said, Haley, you have a 3.7 or 3.8, whatever it was at the time, at Penn, an Ivy League school. Your brain is fine. And I just moved on with my day. But come 2 years ago, and we all experienced a ton of trauma from the pandemic. I'm a mom of 2 young, very active boys. And I was finding myself really interrupting a lot. Like I was interrupting my husband, who's, the love of my life, the best human ever. I was interrupting my boss, my CEO, and who is a very patient human and told me later he didn't even notice it, but I was interrupting him all the time. And I caught myself being like, okay, there is something going on. And I was in therapy at the time, dealing with some of the traumas of the pandemic and being an immunocompromised person in the middle of a terrible, worldwide crisis. And literally the week that I had this realization, my therapist says to me, Haley, have you ever been tested for ADHD? And I was like, oh my goodness, I just told my husband, I think I actually have to get tested. And so, I got the diagnosis and I look back and I said, oh man, a lot of my life makes a lot more sense. And still, I don't fit the criteria from what I've seen and what I know. And a lot of times I'll tell people that I now have this diagnosis and they say, oh, you really? And I was like, yeah, well, think about it, right? Like I have, nonstop talking. Like it's very hard for me not to interrupt people. I have to work really hard. You don't see that. Like I'm literally sometimes sitting with a fidget or pinching myself to like not interrupt somebody. And I have hyperfixation on this topic. Like you get me at a dinner party and someone asked me about, the passion I have for how the system is broken and how it's designed to be that way for education and how so many learners suffer and what we could be doing about that and how the reform movement gets things right but also doesn't and how the pandemic, like I could go on for days, Bridget, and talk about that. And then they're like, oh yeah, that does kind of make sense. But, Haley, you're not like moving all over the place. And I was like, well, I've had, probably 30 years as a learner, maybe 35 years as a learner to develop coping mechanisms that, not everybody has developed. So it's not always as obvious. That's my story.
No, and I thank you so much for sharing that because a lot of what, as educators and especially, those who are working, as deans, that, you're juggling a lot of things. And, our goal usually is kind of to get the job done, to check the thing off the list. And so if we are not mindful of the differences and what could possibly be going on with students, we don't ask the questions, we don't kind of probe a little bit deeper, we just kind of work to kind of get the job done, then we're missing a lot, and we're missing how to really connect with people. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to bring to the surface to highlight is that we have to do a little bit more. We have to take that extra step, spend that extra time with people because they could really be having a hard time and they're just like a duck. You see them on they're in the water, but underneath they're paddling so hard, trying to kind of stay afloat, for lack of a better term. And
Bridget, I appreciate that so deeply because I think I was that duck. You just reminded me of one other thing that was a clue to me my whole life. And this is the one that I actually really specifically want to name for your listeners because I could see it in classrooms and in schools as being considered disruptive. I have a very strong sense of morality. My friends in college used to call me the moral compass. Growing up, I was a debater. If I had to debate, when you get assigned in Lincoln Douglas High School debate, you get assigned a side. If I had to debate a side that I thought was unethical, it was very challenging for me to participate. I just couldn't. I got stuck. I don't remember having trouble losing games, but boy, do I like to win. And my son, he's 8. We've worked for years to get him to a place where he can lose a game. But I will tell you that when I think about how it looks in classrooms for kids that don't have that type of support, they're angry when they don't get to be the person chosen to pass out papers because they think it's not fair. They don't think they get called on enough. They think, an announcement didn't properly give them credit for something that the principal makes over the loudspeaker. Field day, their team loses, or they don't get to participate in an event where they're the best runner. I think back to that and my time as a dean or an AP, or my position was academic dean or a teacher. And I'm like, whoa, I missed what is a key hallmark symptom of neurodiversity, which is fairness and morality, that I probably just felt was frustrating or disruptive. But now I handle so differently with my son. Even if I don't agree with him, I know now just to say, oh, bud, you thought that was really unfair, or you felt like your brother got the bigger piece of the donut we cut in half. And just validating what he felt, even if it wasn't true, literally disarms him. And he immediately, like, you could see his shoulders relax. And so I just want to name that because, like me and my own kid who's high performing, maybe a little bit wigglier than I was, but still like may not present as typically neurodiverse, that morality is like number one for him and was for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And so, we think about, or we don't kind of probe into poor behavior enough to other, people attribute it to bad parenting or just, a number of different things, but not
Sure.
not this piece here. And so that's something that really, again, was another light bulb moment for me, like, oh my goodness, in my years as dean of students, how many times, I just kind of chalk something up to like, oh, that's just, a bad kid, and which I never say anymore because we attribute the behavior, not the child, right? And so
Yeah.
I always have really worked really hard not to kind of label students in that way because that's the easier thing to do, right? That's kind of the check the box, got it, not a good kid, poor social skills, poor behavior. We'll just have to deal with him instead of probing a little bit deeper and trying to understand kind of where they're coming from, their perspective, and how and why they're making the decisions and the choices that they're making. And sometimes we don't feel like we have the bandwidth to do that. Let's be very honest. In the world where, and I was, fortunate enough, I wasn't in a classroom with 25 or 30 students. My classroom size was 12 to 15 in independent schools. And so there's a little bit more kind of leeway there. But when you're dealing with a classroom of 35 students, and you're trying to manage the classroom, but also have learning happen, sometimes people don't feel like they can have the opportunity to take that extra step. And so, what do you say to those folks? How do we manage that piece when you don't feel like I can't? I just have to get the school, like we have to learn. Kids have to. I can't spend my time managing students' behaviors or meeting them where they are.
Well, good luck, because there's no such thing as teaching if you aren't first meeting kids' social and emotional needs. Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you got to follow it. You have to give children a sense of security. They have to be well fed. There's a whole bunch of things that happen before they can learn. And I don't blame teachers for being burdened and overwhelmed, and deans and leaders. This is the hardest work I think that exists. And it was not made easier by a worldwide crisis where every single person experienced trauma, either directly or indirectly. And we're seeing manifestations of that. Kids' academic success rates are lower than they ever have been. Behavioral mental health needs are higher than they ever have been. This is incredibly challenging work. And so you can't just turn on a light switch and say, okay, I'm going to stop feeling this way. I think it's about really, pouring into your understanding of why we call this manifestation of disability. What I go back to trauma again and again, but what the manifestation of trauma looks like. It looks like bad behavior, and it is disruptive, and it can be very, very difficult to run a classroom. And then the other thing I say is, as I said before, everything's about relationships for me. Everything. If your school permits home visits, please go on home visits. If your school has community events, sports activities, parent nights, family nights, go to all of them. If your school allows, and even if it doesn't, maybe ask if you can, make phone calls to families on a regular basis, do that. Make sure you know those kids. If your kids like Roblox, start playing Roblox. If your kids like a particular book series, read the book series. And that's asking a lot of teachers, but I can guarantee that every single child, even the most challenging one, their behavior improves when they feel seen and heard and represented in your classroom. And relationships do that.
Absolutely.
I always figured it a sign of success when I inevitably had laryngitis, as I do basically right now and all the time. But when I had laryngitis and I didn't need to talk to run my classroom because my classroom kids cared about each other. They cared about me, and they knew what to expect. They knew what my classroom was going to be. But that takes work. I couldn't do that in September. I could do that in December. I could do that in February and March and June, but it takes work to establish that. And sometimes you have to put off teaching, direct teaching, in favor of doing trust building activities and fun exercises where they get to know each other and lessons that are explicit about how we treat each other in our community. That comes first.
It absolutely does come first. And, in my journey and getting my master's in restorative practices, and, when people hear that, a lot of people are like, oh, yes, we want to do that. So what's the silver bullet? Like, how do we do it? Like, show me. And I'm like, so here's the thing. It's really at its core is the foundation is about relationship building, full stop. And it starts, with faculty and staff, making sure they are modeling the behavior that you want your students to model. So if
Oh, yes. How we treat each other as
how we
adults,
treat
right?
each other as
Like,
adults.
say hello in the hallway.
Exactly.
Ask about the dog that had to go to the vet the night before. Share parts of yourself as much as you're comfortable
Exactly.
with others.
All of
Yes.
those things. And it's not just about going in and saying, let's have some trust, let's have some circles, and let's
Mm.
talk about your feelings. Nope. You have to start with the basics. And I love the fact that you were talking about building a relationship with your students and building that foundation early, putting that work in early because it pays off in dividends the rest of the year. But you have to take the time. If you don't
Mhm.
sow the seed, nothing can grow. And so,
100%. I think for folks that are listening right now, it's not the beginning of the school year. Another question
right,
that often comes like, can I do it now? And the answer is yes.
absolutely.
A really, really easy one. First of all, I never like to comment on like value, something that's value based with a kid. So building relationship can also be so easy. I feel like for folks listening, if they want to try something tomorrow, notice things about kids. Just say to them very quietly as you walk around a classroom, whether it's your classroom or you're a dean and it's someone else's classroom, like, I noticed you raised your hand twice in the class today with no value, not like good job, not praise, just I noticed. Or I noticed you've been sitting next to, Janessa at lunch more often. And if you do 3 notices over a week, see how a kid's behavior changed. Again, not commenting on hair, shoes. You don't want to assign value to like money that their family may or may not have the ability to spend. I noticed that you added an extra sentence when the teacher asked students to add extra sentences.
I love it.
Just I notice. And I guarantee that's the start of something you could do immediately to start that relationship building if you haven't been pouring into it as much.
Absolutely. So, as we think about, gosh, I can't believe it's almost, November here. We're midway-ish into the school year. We've got a lot of things that are happening in the world in general. The election is coming up, all of things. And it's not a kind of settling, comforting environment for
Surely not.
anyone right now. And
No.
so, how do you think about or advise or help teachers to think about managing classrooms during this time with all the different things that are happening that can trigger different, behavioral responses or different responses in general? Maybe someone now decides that they don't want to talk at all anymore because it's just too overwhelming, too much going on. What would you say to those teachers in terms of how to manage?
First of all, I'd say, I wish I could hug you. Again, this is a really tough job. And thank you for showing up and doing it. We need great teachers in our schools and in our classrooms. I appreciate the work. I like to be practical. So I would say, like, let's model it for kids, right? Man, I woke up this morning and on my drive into the school building today, my head was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about the election, seeing my aunt for the holiday of Thanksgiving. I don't really get along with my aunt. What the holiday break over Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, what that's going to be like. I don't like it when I don't have school because I don't have a routine. And sometimes being at home is harder than being at school. And I was thinking about all those things on my drive into school, and I felt really overwhelmed. I could feel my heart racing. I could feel myself getting sweaty. My stomach, I got a pit in my stomach. And I had to stop the car and I had to take a really deep breath and try to center myself and focus on the here and now. That's a strategy that I use sometimes. I just wanted to let you know, when I woke up today and I came to school, it was hard for me to come to school. I wanted to turn around and go back home. If you're feeling that way too, I want to show you the strategy that I use. And often I show kids, like, you take the inhale on the way up on your finger, the exhale on your way down. One that works really well in my house. What's something I can see right now? Something I can hear, the 5 senses, something I can smell, taste, touch, and it centers me. But I would do a lot of modeling. Show the kids that you too, as an adult, have these big feelings and how you manage them. And make space for your kids to have that discussion as well. And also offer space for them to find you if they'd rather talk about it in private. Because not every kid is an ADHD kid like me, and they're comfortable sharing every piece of their existence with the whole world. Not everybody feels comfortable putting their, in my case, disability on display. And I've never had a problem with that, but that's also because I'm neurodiverse. You're gonna have kids that aren't, and maybe they don't feel comfortable sharing.
Absolutely.
Maybe give them an opportunity to write it down. Everybody write something down that you want me to know about you today after you share that, and then collect it, but make sure you respond to them all. You can't just collect that paper and not respond. That doesn't build trust.
I love it. Let's talk about adults a little bit, because, we also in our roles have to manage adults, and we also have to kind of manage, I put that in quotation marks, parents. And so we often think about, difficult parents. And we just kind of write that off as, I'm not going to kind of, you can fill in the blank as to why someone may or may not be difficult, but we haven't talked about kind of managing and how in our, leadership roles, thinking about neurodiversity is very important as well. What would you say about that?
So first, I'm going to give you the answer that is the unvarnished, moral, ethical, like cannot stray from it answer, which is not really a great answer because it is alienating. So my actual response is every single parent loves their child. They just show it in different ways. And every single parent wants best for their child, but may not be able to show up in the way that you were raised or the way that you see as the perfect prototype for parenting. And so if you think that they're doing it wrong, then we have a fundamental misunderstanding of the many reasons why parents don't always show up in their best form of self. Now, that is not helpful, and it is alienating. And I used to lead with that when I was a school leader. I'd be really like foot in the ground about it. And I learned now that that's not helpful. And so now my answer is actually still to say every single parent wants what's best for their child, and they don't always know how to get what's best for their child. And so it's my job to be an investigator to figure out what is this parent actually asking. If they're neurodiverse, and even if they're not, they might not always say what it actually is. You have to remember that a lot of parents come to school having had terrible experiences with school themselves. School is not a safe place for many families. It's not a place where they felt protected or secure or seen growing up. And maybe, unlike me, they're not a teacher. And so they don't have positive associations with physically being in that building. They may not know how to advocate for their child. Learning how to advocate is a skill that not every person in society has learned or has experienced or has been taught explicitly. So one, please make space for those families to learn that skill. If you can, hold advocacy nights, parent advocacy nights, hold nights for parents to come in, and not every parent knows how to read. If you can, offer opportunities for them to learn how to read. Could you imagine, putting yourself if you have children in another country and no one makes an effort to help you connect to your child's learning? Everything you're experiencing is in another language. Or if you're neurodiverse and maybe you don't know it, every way you try to connect is rebuffed because it's just seen as disruptive, calling the school over and over again, trying to get an answer, thinking your child's not being treated fairly, going back to that like hallmark of ADHD. Or if you're autistic and you can't read social cues, I definitely can say I believe that I've interacted with many parents who are on the autism spectrum who simply did not know how to engage in a way that's considered acceptable. And they tried. They tried, and it was just frustrating. It was relentless sometimes. But looking back now, and once I actually had CMI to help me, looking back, I learned that what they're trying to do is do right by their kid. And they may not necessarily have learned the skills to do that. And it's not necessarily my job to tell them, like, you don't know how to engage. Like, no, but I also have to make grace and space for them to present as their authentic selves. Because expecting people to mask or like hide their autism or their ADHD is also not acceptable. Masking is just telling people they have to fit into a box. So that it's a challenge. It's a really tricky challenge. But I would say that we just have to like really give people grace and you know, going back to some like assume the best.
Yes.
Assume the best in people, that they want what's best for their kid, and they might not always know how to get that for their kid.
Absolutely. You talk about fitting in a box, and that's the thing, you know, I go back to, and I appreciate you saying that no one's normal, but we have created this box in society where we feel like people should fit in and how they should present themselves to the world. And when they are just even a corner out of that box, we respond in a way that's not helpful a lot of times. And, you know, myself included, I feel like I've been guilty of that as well, and not thinking about different ways and meeting people where they are explicitly.
Me too. I mean, again, like I'm saying these things, I'm not in a school anymore, Bridget, right? I have to like acknowledge I haven't been in a school setting as an educator in 7.5 years. So it's easy for me to look back and be like, oh, here are all the things I did wrong. Here's what I do now. So I want to acknowledge that sometimes when I listen or I host a podcast and someone gives advice to a population they no longer are a part of, it can feel difficult.
Right.
So I don't want to just like be sitting here like I know best.
Exactly.
No, this is hard.
It is.
This is what I know now. And the work I do today, I work with tons of neurodiverse learners at Full Mind. You know, we provide personalized learning opportunities that tend to be really successful for students that are not succeeding in a normal classroom environment. And I'm not teaching those classes.
Right.
So I just want to name that, because that would be a weird flex to come on here and give all this advice, but not actually be living it.
I know, same. You know, I haven't been in a classroom or in a school setting in a very long time as well, but we still feel passionate about this work and helping others to be their best selves, whether it's the adults who are leading the students or helping the adults lead the students to be their best selves. So as we think about wrapping up today, we have talked about a lot. And I'm like, wow, because I always want to leave our listeners with some takeaways. And so if there were 3 things that you wanted people to take away from our time today, what would those 3 things be?
I think the first one would be, remember that these assessments for neurodiverse learners are built for boys and men. And so let's think, as we approach our student populations with a supportive lens, also consider what might it look like for a little girl to be neurodiverse. She might not be doing what the media tells us, bouncing off the walls, impulsive. There might be some inattention. There might be some, difficulty focusing. Again, you have that morality, fairness issue that might be presenting itself. And not that you need to go around and diagnose these kids, but you really need to just think about what falls outside of what we've learned so far as how we diagnose neurodiversity, and how can I better support those kids? That'd be the first thing. The second thing I would say is, I think this is true for, we said this at the end, but really assume the best. Kids are trying their best. Parents, family members, school leaders, teachers are trying their best. And if their best is not where you need it to be for a safe learning environment or a safe school community, then think about what we could do to support these individuals getting the learning opportunities and experiences that will equip them with the knowledge for how to make their best better. And the third thing I would say is, it's a wild world out there, and education is harder today than it's ever been. So I just want to end again with my absolute reverence for educators doing this work, and a lot of thanks. Thank you is sometimes a word we don't hear often enough for teachers, but I have the utmost respect and appreciation for folks doing this work. And so my last parting comment would be, I appreciate you, I see you, and I value what you do each and every day.
Awesome. Haley, this was such an amazing conversation. I really appreciate the time that you spent with us today. So many nuggets, so many things that I'm going to continue to think about as I move through and help leaders in schools be their best selves. And so I just want to remind people, meet people where they are. Give people the opportunity to, or take the opportunity to learn more about who you are interacting with on a regular basis. Don't just assume. We know what that means when you assume, right? I'm not going to say it, but I think a lot of times in our effort to kind of be efficient and check the box, we do a lot of assuming. And so if we will take a step back, take a deep breath, give people the benefit of the doubt, meet them where they are, we can really make a huge difference. So again, Haley, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you, and I look forward to further conversation.
Bridget, thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Dean's Roundtable podcast series. If you are a student life professional looking for regular support, look no further than the Dean's Roundtable online community platform, where K-12 leaders share resources, grow their network, and get 24/7 professional support. Also, be sure to check out our monthly Dean's Roundtable office hours, where we tackle real challenges together in real time. Links to join both are in the episode description. Find all the details at deansroundtable.org. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Haley Spira Bauer. Produced and edited by Andrick Sigmund. And music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And, as always, thanks again for listening.